Welcome to the Careering Podcast, a collection of rants and reckons on all things career, hosted by author and creator of Careering 9, Melissa Davies, and her partner in crime, Kelsey Ingalls. If you're brave enough, take a seat, settle in and listen as we tackle difficult career and workplace issues. Sometimes we'll be wrong, sometimes we'll be right, but we will deliver it with confidence and a touch of colourful language, so it will at least be entertaining. Welcome back to the Careering Podcast. You're here with me, Melissa Davies, and my partner in crime, Kelsey Ingalls. We may or may not be drinking a rosé right now.
I'm going to say that we may.
So we're going to be super eloquent this evening.
I mean, that's probably not the word I would use, but yeah. Okay.
So what has meant that you've needed a wine tonight, Kels? Talk me through what's happening for you. What's the theme this week?
To be honest, my theme for the week is just I'm bloody tired. I'm absolutely shattered. I think just the chaos going on with multiple long weekends and
that wasn't a complaint, right?
No, there wasn't a complaint. I am looking forward to getting back into routine, but I am also looking forward to this wine. How has your week been, Melissa? What's your theme?
Well, my theme has been that I've realised in the last couple of years with all of the COVID crazy and these kind of rules we've had to live with, that life has felt like it's been outside of most of our level of control, and we've stopped daydreaming. I think we've lost the ability to really think big and think about what our potential could be. I know I'm going huge.
I'm talking about being tired and you're like daydreaming. Like, we need to get ideation, it needs to be bigger. I'm like, girl, drink your wine.
Okay, let me finish. Because it was really self-indulgent and more thinking about travelling to Corfu and hiking the trails around Spain and just getting global again in our experiences, our thinking, all of that, like just the ability to get outside of ourselves. So I just think, what have we stopped dreaming of? What have we stopped thinking is possible because we've had to exist in a survival space? So let's get back to thinking big.
Yeah, can I have a nap first, though?
You're absolutely welcome to have a nap, Kels, but can you hold off for about half an hour because I want to have a chat with you about pay rises.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yes, because that is the thing that's going to keep me awake. Right, what have you got to say about pay rises, Melissa?
Oh, I've got some facts and stats to kick things off because you know me. I think there's some pretty alarming stuff around the gender pay gap and the ethnic gender pay gap. And while I'd love to think that we can change the system in the next decade, what worries me is that it's been in place for a long time and it might be too hard. Yet, if we can empower every woman to show up to the table ready to negotiate, knowing her worth, and get that extra $1 an hour more, then the impact through society is huge. And
educating men in positions of power on how to have those conversations with women who might not necessarily be brought up to actually ask for a pay rise in those spaces.
100%. So that's such a good point, like being a leader in a position of power, knowing that there might be some cultural implications or gender implications for why people are reticent to have a salary conversation.
100%.
And, you know, and I think it's a really important point because research actually shows that men are 4 times more likely than women to ask for a pay rise. And there's an awesome lady out of the US called Linda Babcock, and she actually says that this has a snowball effect, and a small pay boost now means that carries on every pay rise. So if you start your first job in an organisation negotiating or having pay parity with your peers, every job you apply for after that or every internal promotion means it's off that baseline. And she actually says, what she says to her grad students is that by not negotiating their salary at the beginning of their career, they're leaving anywhere between 1 million and 1.5 million on the table in lost earnings over their lifetime.
But anywhere between $1 and $1.5 million worth of lost earnings.
Yeah, if you don't negotiate your salary when you first start working.
Fuck.
So, Kels, talk to me about how you negotiated your first pay rise or your first salary when you started working.
I was just like, give me money. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did it because I had, like I said on the last episode, I was 6 months unemployed out of university and was just like, give me a job, any job, I just need a job. And I think I took on like an hourly rate for 20 hours a week before I made myself indispensable, basically wouldn't leave. And that's when they, still kept me on an hourly basis. But then I think my second job was when I had to actually like negotiate a contract and a salary, but it was like this big move up to Wellington from Nelson. It wasn't actually that big. And I just remember just being grateful that I was going to get $45,000 a year. And I look back on it and I go, how did I survive in Wellington on $45,000 a year?
Yeah, when the average cost of a house now is what?
Oh, I can't even imagine. So, yeah, I definitely didn't start out in my career negotiating anything. One, because I just didn't realize I could.
Yeah, so like Linda says, you've probably left $1 million on the table over the course of your career.
Don't do that.
It's depressing, right? So that's why we've got to show up ready to have the money chat, even though, like you say, often we're grateful to have income. And it's an awkward, uncomfortable conversation to have. And interestingly, another lady did some research, Emily Amantala, and she said that when women negotiate for themselves, we ask for $7,000 less than our male counterparts. But if we negotiated for a friend, we asked for the same amount. So basically what that's saying is if I'm asking for money for me, I would ask for $7,000 less than a male counterpart. But if I was negotiating on Kelsey's behalf, I would absolutely go into bat for her. And I would ask
sending you in next time.
Yeah, I will.
I'm interested to know whether it's like, because it is awkward. The money conversation is always awkward. It's awkward within just within an organization and talking to your boss, but it's also awkward talking to your peers and having sort of like pay parity and being able to see what everyone else is doing. But in Australia, is it different to what it is in New Zealand? Like, are people more comfortable talking about it?
I think the difference in Australia, well, I'm only speaking from my experience, is I worked for large organisations, and what typically happens with larger organisations is there's an HR function which has a more structured REM strategy. And, one of the examples I had is, so interestingly, when I first started at BOC, I'd gone from a student benefit of $110 a week, that's my total income, to getting paid $29,000 a year, and I thought I was rich. I went and bought a brown suede jacket and thought I was the shit.
I bet that was great in the rain.
Yeah, brown's not my colour. So I don't know why. I think I just thought it was the ultimate sign that I had some money to spend on something luxurious. Like, it felt like an achievable luxury item.
I think we all remember like the thing that we bought when we got our first paycheck that was super important.
Yeah.
Mine was an iPhone. Like one of the earliest iPhones. I was like, yes, I've made it.
Yeah, it's amazing how we have that ability to have freedom with our money and spend it on things we choose rather than just keeping the lights on. Yeah, and I guess that's what money having. There's two parts of it. One is the lifestyle that the money we earn gives us, and one is the ability to feel valued and that our contribution, we're rewarded fairly for the contribution we make to an organisation.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if I think back to my time at BOC, what was interesting is they did have a large HR team, and many of the organisations I've worked for since then have had a structured remuneration strategy, and it's been really transparent, and the process was done in a structured way, usually same time every year on the calendar.
Yeah.
And when I worked for BOC, it was done on what they called, they had salary bands for each role. And I think there was like 17 or 18 bands, and every role was sized externally by an HR agency or recruitment company.
Right.
And then assigned a salary band. So you knew what your salary range would look like.
Did you know it when you went into the organisation?
No, it was only when I was internal and applying for new roles within,
right.
Or I was asked for a pay rise when I was already in a role and I was hitting up my manager for a pay rise. Because I did have a situation when I first moved to Australia, I was grossly underpaid. I think I was so excited to get this huge opportunity to move to Australia and take on a new role. Yeah. I just said yes, I leapt at it. 3 weeks later, I landed in Sydney and I was like, oh, the cost of living here is what?
Yeah, especially with the taxes on top of everything.
Rates. And I didn't understand things like TRP, a total remuneration package. So it wasn't just a salary. I used to have a company car because I was a sales rep in the role I was in before I moved to Australia. And I didn't know that TRP was the equivalent of super and a car. And so right. I went backwards for the first year or two. What really upset me is the 2 colleagues that I worked alongside who did amazing work were men 30 years older than me. And they had engineering degrees, so I can see that there was a depth of experience and capability that meant they should be on a higher pay bracket. Their portfolios were larger than mine too, so objectively I see all of that. But the pay differential on this band strategy, I was just inside the band and they were nearly capping out at the top.
Yeah, and then I also, add on top of that you're going backwards and you're watching these two other people thrive when you're putting in 130% effort and you're still not getting anywhere. I can imagine that kind of rips you down.
Yeah, and luckily for me, I had an organisation where we could have those conversations. And they explained the HR strategy, how it worked. And 6 months into the role, when I'd proven a level of competency, then my salary moved up a little and continue to do so. But it was very much on me to drive that. And also, luckily for me, those two guys that I worked with were awesome and they were super transparent about their pay, and they really helped me negotiate and prepare for a conversation, which was also about, not knowing what an external, like if they had to hire a replacement for me, knowing what they would pay, what's that job worth in the market. So not personalizing it, not making it about me, understanding the competencies and skills I was bringing and what that was worth to the organization or another organization. So I always really encourage people to do the same thing, do some external salary benchmarking so you know why you're going in and what you're asking for. Because I think if I flip it to later in my career as a manager, it's really hard to have a salary conversation when they come to you and say, hey, my rent's gone up. Can I get a $5,000 pay rise?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there are some great tools out there. Like I know Hayes has an awesome pay checker. So you can literally put in your title, put in where in the world you are, and it will tell you what the lowest end is, what the average is, and what the highest is for a specific role. And so you can kind of see where you sit within it. Obviously, I mean, because I've just moved from Wellington to Christchurch, and every recruiter when I moved down here told me to expect 20 to 30 grand less than what I would expect in Wellington. Which, to be honest, I've kind of found that yes, but also no. I think it's about the organisation that you go into. And I think if you go in with those expectations too intensely, you kind of cut yourself off for asking more of what you're actually worth.
Yeah. And I think you and I have had some really good conversations about the power of non-cash benefits and negotiating those. So talk me through some experiences you've had with not just having a salary conversation, but what are some of the other things you think are important to look at in terms of a total package?
Yeah, and I guess, being able to look at an organisation and go, a job, you getting a pay is payment for a service, and you do a specific set of tasks for a specific set of money. And if you are going to do more, then therefore you should be getting paid more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the organisation can actually afford to pay you more within cash flow. And so I've got really good at negotiating car parks and bonuses and holidays and just kind of looking at all of the other pieces of the puzzle that might help make my life nicer. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's in my actual paycheck every 2 weeks.
Yeah. That's super important to think outside the box around what's of value to you. I know some people that have negotiated with their company to just work a half day on Thursday so they can go hiking with their dad on Thursdays, or start late on Tuesday so they can golf with Nana, or have some study leave or some financial aid for study, or even just extra, 2 weeks a year off to attend training courses that are for their personal interests, not for work related things, which is in addition to paid leave. The other thing that's been quite interesting lately, I've been hearing a lot about working for startups, and typically startups tend to pay below market rates, and early stage employees get offered equity in the company, and founders think that that's massive, like they're giving up a piece of their baby and this person should feel grateful. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, maybe back in the heyday of when startups, especially when we think of startup, when we think of Silicon Valley startup, and if you're going into it, you're almost taking a gamble with the founders on what's going to be an organisation that might actually become one of the unicorns. But most don't. I think being able to take that punt if you want to, go for gold. That's awesome. But you have to go into it with your eyes wide open, knowing that it's a punt. But then I also think there's a difference between going into a startup and going into a small business who have got no idea what they're up to, and they might be a new small business, but I wouldn't classify them as a startup, and that one is definitely a risk.
Yeah, so you've had some experiences in those smaller scale businesses. Do you think that the pay scale looks different in a small organisation typically?
Yeah, 100%. I think they've got a very finite amount of money that they can actually afford to pay on pay to their staff members based on cash flow. And it adds pressure to their workforce to bring in that cash flow so they can get their pay. And so I think there's a level of, there can be a level of guilt tripping, for want of a better word, around if you don't do this work, you will not get paid. And that does not create psychological safety in a workplace and doesn't make it easy for you to want to turn up to even do that job in the first place. And so I think there's a lot to be said in terms of how managers and bosses and owners of small businesses have conversations about pay and have transparent conversations about pay, and doing it in a way that is not putting the onus on the employee, that's taking responsibility as an employer.
Yeah, so would you say, what was the process like then? I guess I've used the large corporate example, and I know also in local government it was really structured. How have you found it in those smaller organisations?
Varied. I've worked in lots of different smaller businesses, and some were year-on-year reviews, and again, same thing, having to push it yourself and manage that conversation yourself, and if you don't bring it up, they won't ask. And I mean, fair enough. If I don't have to pay you more, I probably wouldn't, because I'm trying to run a business. And so, I get it, but also at the same time, it does show you a level of valuableness, for want of a better word, when an employer starts that conversation with you.
Yeah, but I wonder, in large organisations, if it wasn't part of an HR strategy that the head of HR said every year line managers have to sit down and have a performance review with their staff and submit a salary increase recommendation, that probably wouldn't happen either, right? Because
no, 100% not.
Because most, I guess we're talking about for-profit entities.
Yeah.
And they have a numerical target to hit, and if they hit that target, they have a salary review conversation. However, to hit that target, not paying your staff more helps you get there a lot faster.
I mean, yeah, as a business owner, as an employer, I can see that it is an absolute balance. And just being able to have that conversation in a transparent way that it's not personalised.
Yeah.
Making sure that it's not actually based on the human being behind it. It's based on the role. Like you said, if that person left that role and someone else had to come in and do exactly the same amount of work, how much would that person be asking for, and how much would you be willing to pay them to get them on board to do that role? That's how much you should be paying on the person in that role at that point in time.
Yeah, and that's why I like the banding piece, because I totally agree with that. But someone with 10 years experience could potentially do that role more efficiently and have greater impact. So they might get paid a higher amount
level.
Based on their level of competency. I'm not saying tenure means that they deserve that salary.
Yeah.
Because I don't agree with that at all. I know some people that have been in a role for 10 years and are nowhere near as competent as someone who's been in that role for 6 months because they've got the right skill set. So, but that's why I think the banding's really helpful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely had a few people and had a few conversations where people have gone, well, I've been there for a certain amount of time, I should be getting a pay rise. And it's like, but if you haven't added any more value to that organization, if your skills and your skills haven't improved and your task list hasn't improved and your job description is still exactly the same, why should you be being paid more?
Yeah.
Apart from inflation.
Yeah.
Because inflation obviously affects the value of the role that you're doing.
Yes.
And the dollar that you're receiving back. But bigger pieces, if you're not adding anything, why should they add anything to your paycheck?
So how would you prepare to have that salary conversation?
Well, in the past, I have sat down with my JD and looked at all the tasks written in it and listed out all the tasks that have somehow managed to fall on my desk because I'm a woman who doesn't know how to say no. I'm working on it, it'll be fine. And sat next to it and gone, okay, well, there are probably about 7 more tasks on here. There's a level of responsibility that's also been given to me, not necessarily through having direct reports, But there is a level of responsibility with a level of a project that I'm working on, or a client that I'm working with, or there's an implied seniority or a higher level of responsibility within that. And being able to sit back with that list and go to my employer and go, okay, let's talk about what's changed over the last year. And if I'm giving you more, I'd like to talk about you giving me more. And we can discuss what that looks like. And so approaching it as a discussion rather than I've done more work, give me more money. Because let's be fair, no one likes being told what to do. And I think that's where some people can go in. Some people are so scared of having this conversation that they go in way too hard and it doesn't help them and doesn't help that conversation. And so I've tended to go through, list everything that that has changed in the last year. And then I've done exactly what we talked about before, gone and had a look at industry market rates and used things like the Hayes salary report and the pay checker, and actually being able to come back to the table with hard data that says, hang on a second, I'm not even within the band of what the low to the high within this role is nationwide. Come on, we should be having discussion about that.
Awesome. So I think there's some really good insights in there about the level of preparation that goes into having a salary conversation. It's making sure that you're having an objective conversation with your manager or the person who can make the decision about salaries, and outlaying factually what tasks you are responsible for, how you've delivered against those tasks, what you've achieved, looking at external benchmarking, so you're keeping up with market rates. And I guess what wasn't said, but I know you do this, is you signal really early on to your manager that you want to have a salary conversation, so they're showing up prepared too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest tips and pieces of advice is just ask. Literally just ask. Because you're never going to get a pay rise if you don't actually ask.
Yeah, and I think doing that early on, saying to your manager, a really easy way to do it, and I've done this and I've been on the receiving end of it. Someone saying to me, I'd really like to have a conversation with you about my salary. Can I book a time with you in the next few weeks? When might work? And so you either say that to your manager, or as the manager hearing that, you know that you've got to do some preparation as well and be prepared to have a robust, fact-based, objective conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're scared of having just outright coming out with the word salary, because it is a hard conversation to have if you haven't had it before, say, look, I want to have a review of my job description and my role and my salary. So lump it in as a full piece of yearly review, or try and couch it in a way that is a bit more comfortable to you.
Yeah, but just remember that if you don't, you're leaving $1.5 million on the table over your career lifetime.
Don't be like me. Get that dollar. Get that $1 million.
Don't be like me and buy a suede jacket. Not good choices. The other thing I thought that might be quite interesting to talk about is a line manager leading a team and being the person responsible for having a salary conversation. I thought it might be quite useful to share some insights of what happens behind the scenes, because I know in many organisations I've worked for, including small teams, small business, local government, as well as the large corporates, there was a calibration session that happened across the organisation to make sure that any pay rises were fair, because what would often happen is one manager might be a real hard ass and everyone only got, say a performance rating of 3 meant they met the standards. Everyone's getting a 3 in that person's team. Someone else might be really generous and really supportive and give everyone a 5. And so from an organisational perspective, if you've got 4 teams, 2 of the managers are grading people really harshly and 2 of the managers are grading them really high, and that performance rating affects the salary component that they get. Typically what would happen as a manager is you're told the organisation has achieved the targets. You have got, say, $6,000 per person on average to divvy up across the team. It's up to you how you decide to allocate that across your team. And typically you would reward your high performers and those that are looking like they're not on par with market rates slightly more. Then what happens in a really objective, fair process is you come together as a leadership team and you put everyone's names and your recommendations up on a board and you discuss the merits of them. Because what can happen is your favourites, the ones you get on really well with, the ones you really like, you can come up with an internal argument for why they deserve more pay.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was quite important to talk through that, because what can happen in those moments is you do have a finite bucket. You can't give everyone a pay rise. and you have to make some hard decisions. But also you then have to defend why you might be giving your star performers a big pay rise, because they might already be near the top of the salary band. And if you don't reward your star performers, they will go elsewhere. So it's a really hot seat to be in that managerial capacity. So
it's definitely, I mean, from that manager level, it's hard work. It's hard as well being the middle person, the middle manager between that role and the end employee. And I've done that before, and that is a hard conversation to have, because I've literally got no control. You're just the messenger. You can go back and go, can I ask for more? Can't ask for more. You're going to have to deal with, would you accept this? No, you won't accept this? Okay, I'll go back and ask for more. And just having to be the in-between person when you've got literally no control over what that looks like.
Oh, that's really tough.
It's hard. It's really hard. And knowing that it's a person that is taking on more responsibility and wants to do the right thing and is a really star performer and deserves more, but you've got literally no control over what that person gets. And all you can do is get on your knees and beg for it.
Yeah.
And that is hard work as well, because you have to be the person that is pissing off the person above you and
who controls
the person underneath you.
Pissing off the person above you who also controls your salary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really hard. But then obviously you don't get that within small organisations. And to be honest, I think half the small businesses I've worked for, they've just kind of put their finger in the wind and gone, oh, no, that. I think it can go both ways, to be honest.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting is at the moment, for every organisation, is there are a lot of predictions about there is a global talent war, and now that borders are opening, there is a prediction that we are going to lose really savvy people heading off overseas. And so if you are in a position where you're thinking about going overseas or staying here, do whatever you want to do. But if you're going to work somewhere, make sure that you negotiate your worth from the first opportunity you have, and don't stop.
Yeah, I think I was reading some stats the other day I saw on Twitter, and it was the average salary increase in a role that you're already in within the States is between 3 and 12%. So sort of 3 covers their inflation, 12's kind of if you're doing well. If you go and move into a new job, you can negotiate pay between 20 and 30%. And so it's a lot easier to do it right at the start of a job than it is to do it inside of a job.
Yeah, agreed. And I would always say I really believe in honesty, but there is one time I reckon everyone should lie. And that is when a new employer or a recruiter says, what's your current salary? Absolutely bullshit.
I was reading a thread the other day, and they were saying, and there was recruiters just going, who are these recruiters that are asking this? They should not be asking it.
Yeah. I think if a recruiter did ask you that, my recommendation would be to flip it on them and say, I'd really love to hear from you. You've heard the tasks and competencies that I bring, the tasks I'm responsible for, the competencies I bring. What do you suggest a role like this is worth in the current market?
Yeah. You've read the JD. You tell me.
Yeah. And it's amazing how, if we're already going in and asking for 7K less than our male counterparts for ourselves, then our expectations of what that role is worth is probably going to be lower too. So I really recommend, if you are, especially if you're changing organisations, going somewhere completely new, you've got a new chance to have a fresh start. Aim high, because you can always negotiate down. It is so hard to keep negotiating up. And like Cal said, it's really uncommon that someone's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I don't think we pay you enough. Can I give you a pay rise?
Has that ever happened to you?
No, but I've done it to one of my team, actually. when I was working for BOC in Queensland after a massive restructure, I inherited a whole new team. And I did have 17 direct reports, 2 females. One was a sales coordinator and one was a sales rep. And the sales rep, compared to her male colleagues that did a really similar role, was paid quite a lot less. So I took her for lunch and said, I want to have a informal conversation where I'm not your manager. You're paid. We need to have a salary conversation. And, what's your background? And it turns out she'd worked in physio, which, like most healthcare, is negotiated as an award, so it's unionised and it's a kind of structured pay grade, so it's really hard to negotiate individual salaries. So she'd never done that before. So I gave her some insights on how to negotiate a pay rise and really encouraged her to do her research and told her to, when we'd had our manager and employee hats back on, to set up a meeting with me to have a salary negotiation, because it was the only way I could think to get her to understand the process so she could keep negotiating for herself in the future. So I haven't had it happen to me. I'd love it to happen to me. I'm self-employed. I might take myself out to lunch tomorrow and have a chat.
Yeah, give yourself a pay rise.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we haven't talked about is what happens if you ask for one and they don't give it to you? Like, what do you do then?
Yeah, don't get salty. Because I think that's the other thing is there, as Kelsey and I've sort of lifted a little wee bit on the middle manager / manager / organisational behind the scenes conversation. Sometimes it's not within the organisation's ability to pay people more. And I would really encourage it to be a good dialogue and ask that question. Say, well, I'm disappointed, but I'd really like to understand what the constraints are. It might be that they don't see what you see in terms of your deliverables, and then you can stay in that dialogue. It might be that the organisation's not in a position to. I would always end that conversation by saying, okay, thank you so much for your honesty and transparency. I'll come back and have a conversation with you again in the future about this.
I mean, is there also an opportunity there to go, especially if it's not from a constraint perspective of, like, we just don't have the money? Yeah. Have you ever had someone come to you and go, okay, well, what do I need to do to get one?
100%, and they are the best conversations to have. So if the company's in a position to be able to give a pay rise, but the person isn't showing that they're performing at that level, you have just got to suck it up and give them direct feedback around. And again, that ability to sit with a job description and some KPIs and say, here are the areas you're doing really well. These are the areas you need to work on, and here's what I expect to see. And if you're able to achieve those things, I would welcome having a salary conversation. Or if they are nearing the top of their salary band and you are restricted, I would be saying, I'd like you to come back to me and have another conversation about additional responsibilities you could take on, or other ways that you could build your capability set, or other non-cash benefits that would be of value to you. I've been on the receiving end of that, actually, when I was had a great manager and I approached her about a salary increase, and the company policy was sort of no more than a 10% increase at a time, and I'd had 10% increases over the last 2 years. So
of course you had, you overachiever.
Yeah, nerdy SWAT. And I actually really liked my job. So that was when I was studying my MBA, and I wanted to get it done faster. And she said, go away and think about what would be of value to you. And I asked for 1 day work from home a week and 1 day work from home in quotation marks, meaning I could go to lectures during the day with the full-time MBA students. And she said, absolutely, but you can never tell anyone that's what I'm letting you do. And so that for me was exceptional. I felt super, I think I worked harder, like smashed my targets that year, and felt super valued. I loved that. And I said, so I think that ability to have a good conversation where you do stay in dialogue and say, well, if not, why not? What can I do?
Yeah. And
actually that ability to complete my studies faster was more valuable than an extra chunk of cash in the back pocket at that time.
And I think, coming at it from a small business perspective in New Zealand, most of the time you're going to need to be the one that leads that conversation and go, okay, well, if you can't give me a pay rise, let's sit down and make a plan, and you tell me how I can get one, and actually force people into those conversations with you, because otherwise it's just never going to happen.
Yeah, and you don't want to become resentful and leave with a bad taste in your mouth because you didn't sit together and have a conversation.
And then if they can't have the conversation, that probably tells you all the things you need to know about why you should probably look for a new job.
And with low unemployment right now, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The market is ready for you to move.
Yeah, I think it's about knowing yourself too. I know a lot of people that have been with organisations that they're unhappy with, and they're scared to test the waters because they don't see how valuable they are. And actually that can happen in an organisation. If you're not valued, your self-worth drops and you can't see how you'll be able to add value to another organisation. Trust us, the culture can stink and you can be an absolute star, and getting out of there is the best thing you can do.
We've both been victims of that. Been victims of it, to the point where I even had flatmates going, you cannot be in this job any longer. You cannot do this for your mental health. You need to go. And those people around you are not lying. They're not making it up. Don't rationalize it away and go, they don't understand. They're not there every day. They see you every day and they can see what it's doing to you. Don't let yourself be a victim of that.
Yeah, so nice way to wrap this conversation up, I think, in that while negotiating your worth and knowing your worth does have a huge financial component when it comes to work, it's more than that. If you're really unhappy, no amount of money is going to make you happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. What are your key takeaways for this conversation? What do you want people to do?
For every single new job you start, negotiate whatever they put on the table, ask for more.
I saw a TikTok the other day, and the woman was like, I never even open up the dollar value. I don't even look at what they're offering me. I just immediately go back and go, no, I need more. And I was like, girl, that has got some big dick energy.
So do that. Please do that. That's the key takeout, actually. No, a bit more than that. But I think it's be objective, be super prepared, have a good understanding of the market conditions, know how you're performing in your role, and let your manager know that you want to have a salary conversation so they don't feel ambushed as well. And if it's uncomfortable for you, it's probably uncomfortable for them. And the only way to get better at this is to keep doing it.
All right. Melissa, do you know what your tweet of the week is this week?
I do, actually. And it's by a lady called Tajal Wagadia. And she tweeted, "It absolutely breaks my heart when I hear candidates say that they're waiting to hear from companies to determine their worth. Please know your worth and ask for it."
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay. My TikTok of the week is not actually even related to any of this.
Great. Yeah, it got a bit serious, so lighten it up for us, Kels.
I'm going to lighten it up with you. We're going to have a bit of workplace chat. We all know the perils of paste and match formatting.
Okay, I have a take, and it's not hot, it's just correct. Paste and match formatting should be the default. Why, when I want to paste something from one document to the other, do I have to select paste and match formatting? Why doesn't that happen automatically? In what context would I want an ugly internet font pasted right into my beautiful little sans serif Word document? If you want font confusion, you should have to ask for it. Somebody get me on the phone with Bill Gates.
I love it. I completely agree. I don't like it. I don't want your other formatting. I want my formatting. And I know Melissa agrees because she is an absolute font fanatic.
I am.
And she's taken all of my documents for this podcast and put them in her own format.
Correct.
So...
Don't you Times New Roman at me. You didn't.
I would never.
I know. We are fontist.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening in. We will be releasing episodes regularly, so wherever you get your podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and like us on all the channels. And we do love questions, stories, and topic ideas, so send them our way. So until next time, get out there, back yourself, and ask for what you deserve.